Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm your learning partner Sushila Hariharan and I provide workshops and customized training sessions on fund accounting, corporate actions, trade life cycle, ODC derivatives. Some of you all have been my subscribers for the last 1 year and you'll have seen many of the videos that I've uploaded on these topics. And I continue to do that because I want to empower you with the knowledge and the information that is needed to get into the investment banking operations industry, which is the growing industry. Last year itself, more than 40,000 candidates across IITs, IIMs, as well as chartered accountants and accounting graduates have got jobs in some of the largest investment banking operations firms in this country, including those of Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Citibank, amongst others. So before you go for that interview, what do you need to know? Let's talk about what are the commonly asked questions in fund accounting at many of the companies over here. Over here, we're going to get a little technical because most of the time, they want to understand what does the candidate know? How good is she or he in understanding the topic that is being handled over here? How familiar are they with the concept of what are funds, etc. So the most commonly asked question is, what do you know about hedge funds? In the last few years, hedge funds have got a lot of flack for having sometimes outperformed the market dramatically, and in some other countries underperformed even the basic benchmarks. So the main intention over here is to ask you, what is your understanding of hedge funds? Okay, and if you don't know that, they will try to break down the word and ask you, do you know the meaning of the term hedge? And you will go and say, yes, I know the meaning of the term hedge. It means to reduce the risk mitigation. So now you have to be very careful. Okay, if you use terms that are very aggressive, okay, like saying hedge funds are risky assets, etc., then you might not be actually putting yourself in a very good position, because what they want to hear from you is things like, what is your understanding of the landscape? So for you to answer this question, be prepared with 2 or 3 words that are commonly used in hedge funds. And my suggestion is go with commonly used terms like hedge funds are pools of funds meant for, investors who have a lot of capital to deploy. All right. So hedge funds are pooling of funds. They're the fund manager. If you haven't seen my videos already on this topic, please go through them, because you have to have a very strong definition of understanding the hedge fund industry, because that's where you're going to be working. You don't also want to say things like hedge funds are, high risk, high pay, high risk, high return kind of investments, because there's nowhere in the world that we have proved that taking high risk gives you high return. Okay, then we'll all go to Las Vegas and be gambling away to glory, because high risk gives us high return. We're just taking in high risk to, in the hope that we get a high return, and you therefore don't want to sound too aggressive on this, because if you say, oh, hedge funds are high risk, high return, then somebody might turn around and ask, so they don't invest in bonds. Well, many of the bond funds are there. Many of the distressed funds are there. So you really don't want to, tread on that path. So the safest answer would be a hedge fund is a pool of funds from large, high net worth individuals, especially those who understand the concept of risk and returns in a fast, volatile market space. Okay. So be very clear, be very cautious, don't be very aggressive in your response to understanding hedge funds. Now, they might ask you, have you heard of any hedge funds? Okay, and you might want to give out some names, a question that will be dealt with a little later. The second kind of question that could possibly arise is, how does a hedge fund differ from a mutual fund? Now, we are all very familiar with mutual funds in the Indian context, because mutual fund sahi hai, right? I mean, we are bombarded with that, not only from SEBI, but also from Sachin Tendulkar and their likes about how mutual funds sahi hai. Now, this is another thing, because hedge funds and mutual funds are both pooled investments. So you want to be very clear about how we're going to talk about how hedge funds are different from mutual funds. All right? And you want to clearly explain that hedge funds target high net worth individuals. Individuals have a lot of capital to deploy as compared to a mutual fund which targets more or less the retail investors, okay? And is meant for investors who do not have that kind of risk appetite or risk sophistication with respect to uh, understanding the market space. You also want to go on to explain how hedge funds take in large pools of capital from individual investors as compared to a mutual fund where you can do a small SIP as well from a monthly salary. You don't want to tell about the riskiness again over here. You don't want to say that mutual fund sahi hai, hedge fund sahi nahi hai, or something like that, because that's such a foolish thing to say. Also because hedge funds could be sahi also at sometimes, right? So again, don't get into the riskiness of the asset or the investing strategy. Just talk about how the investor is aware about the risk involved in the hedge fund as compared to a mutual fund. Look, a mutual fund is targeted at a salaried employee, right? Whose main job is to work 8 to 10 hours a day, and then the money that he gets or she gets from the company is then invested in the mutual fund. Yeah, so that kind of generates returns, and then you want to go into portfolio diversification and explaining the principles of diversification that work in the case of a mutual fund. Hedge funds don't generally follow principles of diversification. In fact, they follow principles of concentration, okay, because they want to put a lot of money into one single asset class and run that asset class, or milk it dry kind of a thing. So therefore hedge funds also are large pools of capital that invest across assets, across currencies, across countries, in different stages of the growth of the companies as well. So be very clear about how these two are different from here. Don't say things like hedge funds are unregulated and mutual funds are regulated, because that's not entirely true. Okay, a hedge fund is regulated. It just doesn't have disclosures. Okay, hedge funds pay taxes. Of course, they pay taxes. Do they have to have approvals from SEC, that's a Securities Exchange Commission? Yes, they must have approvals. And do they have to have public disclosures? No, they don't have to have public disclosures. Okay, so a mutual fund, because it takes money from retail investors, must have public disclosures. Hedge funds don't take money from retail investors. They don't need to have public disclosures. Another question that could be asked is, what are the key financial statements of a company? Now, in a hedge fund, like any other company, the key financial statements are, of course, the income statements, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. Now, the tricky part over here is explaining about what each one does. Okay, so when you're talking about what is the flow concept, what is the static concept, what is the movement concept, then you've got to be very clear that you're not digging in your grave over here. Because be very clear, a simple question is like, why does depreciation appear both on the balance sheet and on the income statement can be asked. So you have to be a little armed with information so that you don't fall into a trap while answering questions like these. But these are things that have to be there at the back of your head, because you must remember that while answering questions about the key financial statements, you will be in a position to actually give a lot of examples. Do that. Show your knowledge. Flaunt your knowledge. But for flaunting knowledge, you have to be prepared for it. So go through your first year BBA books or any kind of accounting source to understand what are the key financial statements of a company. Another question that could be asked is, can you name some hedge funds? Okay. At this point of time, don't use names like George Soros. Okay, because he's a little controversial figure and we don't want to get into that zone of answering what is right or what is left or wrong. Okay, I don't know. So therefore, let's stick to naming hedge funds that we know about. So if you can tell me, just pick down the list of the top 5 hedge funds. Okay, the top 5 hedge funds include BlackRock, Bridgewater, Bill Ackman's fund. So these are all funds that have dominated the markets. So go through the list, find out some names, preferably take names that have jobs outsourced to India. Okay? Morgan Stanley has a lot of hedge funds. Goldman Sachs has a lot of hedge funds. So answer some of these questions in the context of how the market or how the interviewer expects you to know about this. You will also be asked questions like the FTX, okay? And what do you know about it? Be careful, you don't want to tread into territory that you don't know about. The next question that could potentially be asked is, what are the characteristics of an asset? Okay, I personally love to ask this question because many people get confused about what is an asset. Okay, so you have to go back to your original definition of an asset, understanding why an asset is recognized as it is, how it is denominated in rupees or dollars, or how it is held because it's expected to generate returns. So in this point of, in this discussion, you must bring about the linkages between an asset on the balance sheet as well as the income that is expected from the asset. Okay. I had a wisecrack interview once when I was applying, when I had applied for a training program, and they asked me, what do you think, Sushila? Is it right for people to be recognized as assets? HR department, normally, the personnel department, human resources department, always says our people are an asset. Yeah, you have CEOs of large companies telling that our people, our employees are an asset, whether they are in operations or marketing or finance or cost, they are an asset for us. Okay. So when they're using the term asset, it is very different from the way we accountants or finance professionals use the term asset, because for us, asset has to be denominated in INR or USD, and it has to generate revenue. In many companies, HR, in all companies, companies don't own the people, yeah, and they don't, we cannot tap them in USD and INR. So there's a big difference in terms of understanding assets in that context, about how we recognize the asset in a company. The next question, that a company earns profits for a financial year. Is this an asset or a liability for the company? So this is one of the questions I love to ask, because at this point of time, you can go into a spin about understanding whether the profit is an asset or a liability. Okay? So therefore, I have added the 3 words after that. Is it an asset or a liability for the company? Now go back to your definition of the company and say that a company is an institution that is different from the shareholders, right? And from the owners. So therefore, for the company, a profit is a liability, because you go back to understanding what is a liability. A liability is something that the company owes. Okay? So an asset is something that the company owns. A liability is something that the company owes. You want to go back into that and see whether this is an asset or a liability for the company. You want to say the profits of a company first belong to the shareholders. Therefore, it's a liability for the company. It does not belong to the company because of this reason, that is, the company is a distinct entity, different from the owners and the shareholders. Another question that could pop up is, what is mark to market of financial instruments? So look, they're testing you on all kinds of knowledge. One is your basic understanding of the industries. Second is understanding of accounting. Third is, what is your spin on markets? How market savvy are you, right? And you want to explain what is the meaning of mark to market. Now, financial instruments have a tendency to change in valuation every day. But you are not trading on it every day, okay? You could be, the fund manager could have bought the asset and kept it for a long period of time, The intention over here is to understand that the balance sheet must always reflect the latest position. The trader wants to know what is the latest position of the uh, bank's assets, and therefore we do a mark to market. So remember to use terms like MTM, or talk about revaluation, or talk about words like understanding why this is a nominal P&L and not a actual P&L. Okay, so the main idea of mark to market is valuing the outstanding contracts at the latest market price or at the current market price. You can actually bring about a very good story over here. You can tell the story of how Barings Bank collapsed because it did not do a mark to market of financial instruments, and they never realized the extent of losses till actually counterparty collateral calls started coming in. So mark to market is a very important financial and accounting uh, entry that has to be done, and this prevents accounting fudgery as well. Some of the other question that can be asked is, what is goodwill? Okay, now this is such a tricky thing because goodwill is seen in some balance sheets, it's not seen in most balance sheets. So over here, it would be best to go back to understanding what is IFRS rules on goodwill and then explaining how this goodwill arises. Okay, how it's a valuation driven activity and how it occurs only in some or not all of the cases. Another question that could be asked is, what are the stock markets in India or in the US? And if you're going to be joining an investment bank which is so aggressively trading in assets, then you would like to demonstrate your knowledge about the markets. And you must go ahead and say that we have the stock markets are NSE and BSE, or in the US, NYSE and NASDAQ, and you want to explain what is your understanding of the stock market. Okay, what is a share market? How is it traded? How is it independent? Electronic matching of orders, etc. Another question that could up is, why do you want to join an investment bank? Okay,